The summer heat of 1876 pressed down on Concord, Massachusetts like a heavy woolen blanket, and Penelope Jenkins stood on the porch of her family's modest homestead, wondering if she would spend the rest of her days watching life pass her by instead of living it. She was 22 years old and already considered too particular by most of the town's standards, having turned down 3 marriage proposals in the last year alone. Her mother had nearly fainted when she refused the banker's son, a portly man of 40 with breath that smelled of cigars and entitlement. Penelope had her reasons, though she kept them mostly to herself. She wanted something more than security. She wanted passion, adventure, and a love that made her heart race faster than a wild Mustang across open plains. The wildflowers in her hands were a riot of color: purple asters, golden black-eyed Susans, white Queen Anne's lace, and bright red Indian paintbrush. She had walked 3 miles that morning to gather them from the meadow beyond the old Miller property, filling her basket until it overflowed. Now she stood at the rough-hewn table on the porch, carefully arranging them in mason jars, the glass still cool from the well water she had filled them with. Penelope had always found peace in creating beauty from simple things. Her father had died 2 years ago, leaving her and her mother to manage the small farm on their own. They grew vegetables mostly, sold eggs from their chickens, and took in mending work when they could get it. It was not an easy life, but it was theirs, and Penelope took pride in making their little homestead as lovely as she could manage. She was positioning a particularly stubborn stem of Indian paintbrush when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Penelope looked up, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and saw a rider coming up the dusty road. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. A tall man on a chestnut mare, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and riding with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than out of it. The rider slowed as he approached the house, and Penelope felt her breath catch slightly in her throat. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. His eyes, when they met hers, were a striking hazel that seemed to shift between green and gold in the sunlight. "Good afternoon, miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. His voice was deep and warm, with a slight drawl that spoke of time spent farther south and west. "I am looking for the Jenkins place. Would this be it?" Penelope set down the flowers she had been holding and wiped her hands on her apron. "It is. I am Penelope Jenkins. How can I help you?" The cowboy dismounted with fluid grace, looping his horse's reins over the porch railing. Up close, he was even more striking, with strong features and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. There was a kindness in his eyes, though, that softened the ruggedness of his appearance. "Name is Quinton Pierce, miss. I was told in town that your mother might have a room to let. I am looking for work in the area and need a place to stay for a spell." Penelope's mother, Martha, chose that moment to emerge from the house, wiping flour from her hands. She was a practical woman who had learned to size people up quickly after her husband's death. "Mr. Pierce, is it? What kind of work are you looking for?" "Any honest work, madam. I have experience with horses, cattle, farming, building, and just about anything else that needs doing. I have been working on ranches out west, but I decided it was time to see a different part of the country." Martha studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes taking in everything from his worn but well-maintained boots to the calluses on his hands. "We do have a room in the barn loft. It is not fancy, but it is clean and dry. $3 a week, including breakfast and supper." "That would be more than fair, madam. I am much obliged." As Martha showed Quinton to the barn, Penelope found herself watching them go, her hands unconsciously returning to the wildflowers. There was something about the cowboy that intrigued her, a quality she could not quite name. He moved with purpose but without hurry, spoke with respect but without servility. She shook her head, chiding herself for being fanciful. He was just a drifter passing through, nothing more. But over the following days, Penelope found her initial assessment challenged at every turn. Quinton proved to be an extraordinarily hard worker, tackling every task with dedication and skill. He repaired the sagging fence around the chicken coop, fixed the loose shingles on the barn roof, and helped Martha turn over the soil in the vegetable garden for fall planting. He was unfailingly polite and respectful, always addressing them as Miss and Madam. But there was a warmth in his manner that went beyond mere courtesy. Penelope noticed the way he was gentle with the animals, speaking softly to the horses and chickens as he worked. She noticed how he always offered to help carry heavy loads, but never in a way that made her feel weak or incapable. And she noticed, though she tried not to, the way his shirt pulled across his shoulders when he worked, the play of muscles beneath sun-darkened skin. On the fourth evening of his stay, Penelope was once again on the porch with her wildflowers. She had made it a habit to keep fresh arrangements in the house, and the old ones needed replacing. Quinton had finished his work for the day and was washing up at the pump in the yard. She tried to focus on her task, but her eyes kept drifting to where he stood, water droplets catching the golden light of the setting sun. "Those are mighty pretty," Quinton said, startling her. She had not noticed him approaching the porch. "The flowers, I mean." "You have a real talent for making things beautiful." Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. It is a simple enough task." "I do not know about that. I have seen plenty of folks try to arrange flowers and end up with something that looks like a bird's nest after a storm." He smiled, and Penelope noticed the way it crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You make it look easy, but I suspect there is more art to it than you let on." He stood there for a moment, watching her work, and Penelope became acutely aware of every movement she made. She felt clumsy suddenly, all thumbs, though she had been arranging flowers since she was a child. "Where did you learn to work with horses the way you do?" she asked, desperate to fill the silence with something other than the pounding of her heart. Quinton leaned against the porch railing, his gaze drifting toward the horizon where the sun was beginning its descent. "My father had a small ranch in Texas. I grew up in the saddle, practically. When he died, the bank took the land, and I have been working other people's ranches ever since. Thought maybe it was time to try something different, see if there was more to life than following cattle across the same dusty trails year after year." There was a note of longing in his voice that resonated deep within Penelope's chest. "I understand that feeling," she said softly. "The wanting something more, I mean. Sometimes I feel like I am waiting for my real life to begin, but I do not know what that life looks like or how to find it." Quinton turned to look at her directly, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath hitch. "Maybe we are not supposed to find it. Maybe we are supposed to build it." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Martha's voice calling them in for supper broke the spell, and they both moved toward the house. But Penelope felt as though something had shifted. Some invisible line had been crossed. Over the next few weeks, Quinton became an integral part of their household. He took on projects without being asked, always finding something that needed fixing or improving. He rebuilt the front steps, reinforced the barn door, and even constructed a new chicken coop that was twice the size of the old one. In the evenings, after supper, he would sometimes sit on the porch and tell stories of his travels out west, painting vivid pictures of vast open ranges, towering mountains, and skies so big They seemed to swallow the earth. Penelope found herself drawn to these storytelling sessions, sitting with her mending or her flowers, ostensibly focused on her work but really drinking in every word. Quinton had a gift for description, making her feel as though she could see the places he described. Smell the sage and creosote, feel the dry desert wind on her skin. One evening, as the fireflies began their nightly dance and the cicadas sang their summer song, Quinton turned to Penelope and said, "You would love it out there. The wildflowers in spring cover the desert like a painted canvas, colors you would not believe could exist in nature." "It sounds wonderful," Penelope said, unable to keep the wistfulness from her voice. "I have never been farther than Boston. Would you want to travel, see new places?" "More than anything," she admitted. "But wanting something and being able to have it are two different things. I have responsibilities here. My mother needs me." Quinton nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes I think we use responsibility as a shield, protecting us from the scary prospect of going after what we really want." His words struck a chord deep within her, but before she could respond, Martha came out to join them, and the conversation turned to more practical matters. The following Saturday, Concord held its monthly market day, and Penelope prepared to take some of her flower arrangements into town to sell. She had been doing this for nearly a year, and while it did not bring in much money, every little bit helped. Quinton offered to drive her in the wagon, and Martha, with a knowing look that made Penelope's cheeks burn, agreed it was a good idea. The ride into town was pleasant, the morning still cool enough to be comfortable. Quinton handled the horses with easy competence, and they fell into conversation about everything and nothing. Penelope found herself laughing more than she had in months, surprised by Quinton's dry wit and the stories he told about mishaps and adventures on the trail. "There was this one time," he said, his eyes dancing with mirth, "when a young cowhand decided he could break this wild stallion that had been terrorizing the ranch. He was so confident, strutting around like a peacock, telling everyone how he had a way with horses. Well, he lasted about 3 seconds before that horse sent him flying through the air. He landed right in the water trough, scared the ducks half to death." Penelope laughed, imagining the scene. Was he hurt? Only his pride. "But he never tried to break another horse without proper training first, so I suppose the lesson was worth the dunking." They set up Penelope's stall in the market square, arranging the mason jars filled with wildflowers on the rough wooden table. Quinton had helped her make a sign that read "Fresh Wildflower Arrangements" in neat lettering, and within minutes of opening, customers began to stop by. Penelope had a regular clientele of older women who appreciated her artistic eye. But today, there seemed to be more interest than usual. She suspected Quinton's presence might have something to do with it. He stood nearby, ostensibly browsing the other stalls, but she noticed the way several young women found excuses to walk past multiple times, casting appreciative glances his way. She felt an unexpected surge of something that might have been jealousy, when one particularly pretty blonde girl struck up a conversation with him. Penelope tried to focus on her customers, but her eyes kept drifting back to where Quinton stood, his hat pushed back on his head, nodding politely at whatever the blonde was saying. Then the girl laughed and placed her hand on Quinton's arm, and Penelope felt her jaw tighten. She turned back to the elderly woman she was helping with perhaps more force than necessary, wrapping the mason jar with excessive care. "That young man yours?" the woman asked, a twinkle in her eye. "What? No, of course not. He just works for us." Hum. "Well, if I were 40 years younger and he looked at me the way he looks at you, I would not be letting him slip through my fingers." Penelope glanced up, surprised. "What do you mean, the way he looks at me?" the woman chuckled. Child, are you blind? That boy has not taken his eyes off you since you arrived. Even now, while that pretty little thing is chattering at him, he is watching you." Penelope looked over again, and sure enough, Quinton's gaze was fixed on her, not the blonde. When their eyes met, he smiled, excused himself from the other girl, and walked back over to Penelope's stall. "Need any help?" he asked. "I thought you were occupied," Penelope said, then immediately wished she could take the words back. They sounded petty and jealous, which was exactly what she was trying to hide. Quinton's smile widened. "Were you worried about me, Penelope? Certainly not. You are free to talk to whomever you please. That is good to know. But for the record, I would rather talk to you than anyone else in this entire market." The simple sincerity of his words made her heart skip. She busied herself rearranging jars that did not need rearranging, trying to hide the smile that threatened to take over her face. They sold out of flower arrangements by early afternoon, much to Penelope's delight. With the extra money, she treated them both to lunch at the local cafe, insisting it was only fair since Quinton had helped her set up and pack up. Over roast beef sandwiches and lemonade, Quinton asked, "What would you do if you could do anything? If there were no responsibilities, no limitations, what would your life look like?" Penelope considered the question seriously, taking a sip of her lemonade while she thought. "I think I would travel. I would want to see all the places you have described, the mountains and deserts and wide open spaces. I would want to fill mason jars with wildflowers from every corner of the country. And I would want to share it all with someone who saw beauty in the same things I did." She paused, surprised by her own honesty. "What about you?" "I would want a place of my own again. Not a big ranch, just enough land to raise horses and maybe some cattle. A good sturdy house with a porch where you could sit and watch the sunset. And I would want someone to share it with, someone who was not afraid of hard work, but who also knew how to find joy in simple things. Someone who could arrange wildflowers and make a place feel like home." They looked at each other across the table, and Penelope felt the air between them crackle with unspoken possibility. The moment was interrupted by the cafe owner asking if they wanted pie, and though they both declined, the spell had been broken. On the ride home they were quieter, but it was a comfortable silence, full of thoughts neither was quite ready to voice. When they arrived back at the farm, the sun was low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Quinton helped Penelope down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment, he did not let go, and they stood there, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, could smell the clean scent of soap and leather and something uniquely him. "Penelope," he started, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes." But whatever he had been about to say was cut off by Martha calling from the house, needing help with something in the kitchen. Quinton stepped back, releasing her, and the moment was gone. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Penelope could not sleep. She kept thinking about Quinton, about the way he looked at her, the way he made her laugh, the way her heart sped up whenever he was near. She was falling in love with him, she realized. Perhaps she had been falling for weeks now, but she had been too afraid to acknowledge it. But what good did it do to fall in love with a drifter? Quinton had made no indication that he planned to stay in Concord permanently. He had taken the room week by week, never committing to anything long-term. For all she knew, he would move on any day now, chasing whatever dream had brought him east in the first place. The thought of him leaving made her chest ache in a way she had never experienced before. This was different from the mild disappointment she had felt when previous suitors had lost interest. This felt like something vital was being torn away, like losing a piece of herself she had not known was missing until he arrived. The next morning, Penelope was up early, determined to push these confusing feelings aside and focus on her work. She was on the porch with fresh wildflowers, having walked out to the meadow before dawn to gather them. The morning dew still clung to the petals, making them sparkle in the early light. She had just begun arranging them in mason jars when Quinton emerged from the barn. He looked like he had not slept well either, his hair mussed and shadows under his eyes. But he smiled when he saw her, that warm, genuine smile that made her insides flutter. "You are up early," he said, climbing the porch steps to stand beside her. "Could not sleep. Thought I might as well do something productive." "I know the feeling. I was awake half the night myself, thinking." "About what?" The question was out before she could stop it. Quinton picked up one of the wildflowers, a delicate purple aster, and twirled it between his fingers. "About the future. About what I want from life. About whether I have been running away from things or running toward them." Penelope's hands stilled on the mason jar she was holding. "And did you come to any conclusions?" "Maybe. I realized that I have spent the last 5 years moving from place to place, telling myself I was looking for something, but never staying anywhere long enough to actually find it. I thought maybe if I saw enough places, worked enough jobs, eventually I would stumble onto whatever it was I was missing." "And have you found it?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Quinton set down the flower and turned to face her fully. "I think maybe I have. But I am not sure what to do about it." Before Penelope could respond, before she could even fully process what he might be saying, they heard the sound of multiple horses approaching fast. Both of them turned toward the road, and Penelope felt her stomach drop at what she saw. 4 riders were coming up the road at a gallop, and even from a distance, she could see they looked rough, the kind of men her father had always warned her to avoid. They pulled up in front of the house in a cloud of dust, their horses wild-eyed and lathered with sweat. "Well, well," said the man in front, a lean, cruel-faced character with a scar running down his left cheek. "What do we have here? Nice little farm, good horses in that barn, I would wager." Quinton stepped in front of Penelope, his entire demeanor changing. The easygoing cowboy was gone, replaced by someone harder, more dangerous. "You are on private property. State your business or move along." The scarred man laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Our business is taking what we need. We have been riding hard and our horses are spent. We will be taking yours, along with any food and money you might have." "That is not going to happen," Quinton said, his voice flat and cold. "You are outnumbered, cowboy. You and the pretty little girl there should just step aside and let us take what we want. Nobody needs to get hurt." Martha had come out of the house, and Penelope saw her mother's face go pale. "Penelope, come inside," Martha said, her voice shaking. But Penelope did not move. She could see the tension in Quinton's shoulders, could see his hand hovering near his hip. She had not even realized he wore a gun until that moment, the holster usually covered by his jacket. "Last chance," the scarred man said. "Move aside or we will move you." "Ride away," Quinton said. "Right now, while you still can." Something in his tone must have given the bandits pause, because the scarred man hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he reassessed the situation. Then one of his companions, a burly man with a thick beard, made the mistake of reaching for his gun. What happened next occurred so fast that Penelope barely registered it. Quinton drew his weapon with blinding speed and fired once, the shot echoing across the farmyard. The bearded man's gun went flying from his hand, and he howled in pain, clutching his wrist. "Next one will not be a warning shot," Quinton said, his gun now trained on the scarred leader. "Now get out of here before I forget I am trying to be civilized." The 4 men exchanged glances, clearly reevaluating their chances. The scarred man's eyes were full of hate, but he was not stupid. He jerked his head toward his companions. "This is not over, Cowboy. We will remember you." "You do that," Quinton said. "And while you are remembering, remember that I could have killed all four of you and been well within my rights. Next time I might not be so generous." The bandits turned their horses and rode off, the bearded man still cursing and holding his injured wrist. Quinton did not holster his gun until they were out of sight, and even then, he kept his eyes on the road for several long minutes. "Quinton," Penelope breathed, her legs suddenly shaky. The fear she had held at bay during the confrontation now washed over her in a wave. He turned to her immediately, his expression softening. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "No, I am fine. But you could have been killed. There were four of them." "I was not going to let them hurt you or your mother. I would have taken on 40 of them if I had to." Martha had sunk down onto the porch steps, her face still pale. "Mr. Pierce, I do not know how to thank you. Those men, they would have taken everything, maybe worse." "No thanks necessary, madam. This is my home too, for now at least. I protect what is mine." The possessiveness in his words made Penelope's heart race for entirely different reasons than the fear from moments before. Quinton held her gaze for a long moment, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. The rest of the day passed in a strange haze of normalcy and tension. Quinton insisted on riding into town to report the incident to the sheriff, and he made Penelope and Martha promise to stay inside with the doors locked until he returned. When he came back several hours later, he reported that the sheriff had promised to keep an eye out for the bandits, though he did not sound optimistic about catching them. "Men like that drift from place to place, causing trouble wherever they go," Quinton said over supper. "The best we can hope is that they have moved on to easier targets." "Do you think they will come back?" Martha asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at all of them. "I doubt it. They know they are outmatched here, cowards like that prefer victims who cannot fight back." That night, Penelope could not settle. Every sound made her jump, every creak of the house settling made her heart race. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and slipped out onto the porch. The night was clear and cool, the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She was surprised to find Quinton already there, sitting on the porch steps, his rifle across his knees. "Could not sleep either?" he asked softly. Penelope shook her head and sat down beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance. "Every time I close my eyes, I see those men. I keep thinking about what could have happened if you had not been here. But I was here, and nothing happened. This time. But you will not always be here, will you? Eventually, you will move on and it will just be Mother and me again." Quinton was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkness. "What if I did not move on?" Penelope's heart stuttered in her chest. What if I stayed, here in Concord? What if I found a way to make a life here?" "Do you mean that?" She hardly dared to hope. Quinton turned to look at her, and even in the dim starlight she could see the intensity in his eyes. "I have been thinking about what I said this morning about finding what I was looking for. Penelope, these past few weeks living here, working alongside you and your mother, sitting on this porch in the evenings, it has felt more like home than anywhere I have been since I lost my father's ranch. And I think a large part of that is because of you. Me." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Yes, you, the way you find beauty in simple things. The way you care for your mother without complaint. The way you laugh at my stories and ask questions like you really care about the answers. The way you arrange those wildflowers like each one matters." He reached out and gently took her hand, his rough calluses warm against her skin. "I know I do not have much to offer. I have some money saved, enough to maybe buy a small piece of land, start building something. It would not be easy and it would not be fancy, but I would work hard every day to give you a good life." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Quinton, are you asking what I think you are asking?" He stood and pulled her gently to her feet, keeping hold of her hand. "I guess I am not doing this very well. I had a whole speech planned, but now that the moment is here, the words are all jumbled up in my head." "Then do not think. Just say what is in your heart." Quinton took a deep breath, his thumb stroking gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Penelope Jenkins, I love you. I think I have loved you since that first day when I rode up and saw you standing on this porch with your wildflowers. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you see the world. I want to build a life with you, a real life, with a home and a future, and all the adventures we can find together. So I am asking, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than dollars and arrange a life with me?" The words hit her like a physical force, beautiful and perfect, and everything she had not even known she wanted to hear. "Yes," she said, the word coming out choked with emotion. "Yes, Quinton, I will marry you. I love you too. I think I have been waiting for you my whole life without even knowing it." Quinton let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. "May I kiss you?" In answer, Penelope rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape and taste of each other. Then Quinton's arms came around her waist, pulling her closer, and Penelope's hands slid up to tangle in his hair, and the kiss deepened into something that made her toes curl and her heart sing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinton rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you, Penelope, I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret saying yes." "I could never regret choosing love," she said softly. "Choosing you." They stood there on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms until the stars began to fade with the approach of dawn. There were practical matters to discuss, plans to make, a future to build, but for now, it was enough to simply be together, to hold each other and dream about all the tomorrows stretching out before them. Martha was delighted when they told her the news the next morning, though she admitted she had seen it coming for weeks. "You two were not as subtle as you thought," she said with a smile. "I have been expecting this announcement since about the third day Quinton was here, and I caught him watching you arrange flowers with the most lovesick expression I have ever seen. The wedding was planned for 3 weeks hence, just enough time to make the necessary arrangements. It would be a simple affair, held in the small church in town, with a reception at the farm afterward. Penelope did not need fancy decorations or an elaborate celebration. All she needed was Quinton and the people she cared about bearing witness to their union. In the time leading up to the wedding, Quinton worked harder than ever, determined to prove himself worthy of Penelope's hand. He had found a piece of land for sale just outside of town, 20 acres with a small creek running through it, and a view of the surrounding hills that took Penelope's breath away when he showed it to her. "I have enough saved to buy the land and start building a house," he explained, his arm around her waist as they stood surveying what would be their future home. "It will not be anything grand at first, but we can add on as we go. And there is plenty of room for horses, maybe some cattle eventually." "It is perfect," Penelope said, and she meant it. She could already see it in her mind's eye. A cozy house with a wide porch, wildflowers growing in the yard, horses grazing in the pasture. A home filled with love and laughter and the family they would build together. "I was thinking," Quinton said, his voice careful, "that we could build your mother a small cottage on the property too. That way she would be close but still have her independence." We could help her run her farm until we get ours established, and then eventually she could come live with us if she wanted. Penelope turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You would do that, make room for my mother in our new life, of course. She is your family, which makes her my family now too. Besides, I've grown quite fond of her. She makes the best apple pie I have ever tasted. Penelope laughed and kissed him soundly. Have I mentioned lately that I love you? Not in the last 5 minutes. I was starting to worry. They spent the afternoon walking the land, planning where everything would go. Quinton wanted the house positioned to catch the morning sun, with the barn close enough to be convenient but far enough away that the smell would not reach the house. Penelope wanted a big garden, space for vegetables and herbs, and, of course, plenty of wildflowers. I am going to fill every room of our house with mason jars full of flowers, she declared. Flowers from our own land, picked with our own hands. And I am going to buy you proper vases too, Quinton said. Pretty crystal ones from Boston. I will always love mason jars best, Penelope said softly. They will always remind me of the day you rode up to our farm and changed my life forever. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect late summer day that made everything feel possible. Penelope, dressed in her mother's wedding gown, altered to fit her slimmer frame. The ivory lace yellowed slightly with age but still beautiful. Martha had woven wildflowers into her daughter's hair, a crown of purple and gold and white that made her look like a fairy tale princess. The church was packed with well-wishers, more people than Penelope had expected. In the weeks since their engagement, she and Quinton had become something of a romantic legend in Concord. The story of the drifting cowboy and the girl with the wildflowers had captured people's imaginations, and it seemed like half the town wanted to witness their happy ending. But as Penelope walked down the aisle on her mother's arm, she only had eyes for Quinton. He stood at the altar in his best suit, looking handsome and nervous and so full of love that it made her heart ache in the best possible way. When she reached him and took his hand, she felt everything else fall away until it was just the two of them, making promises that would bind their lives together. I, Quinton Paul Pierce, take you, Penelope Marie Jenkins, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in good times and bad, in sickness and health, for as long as we both shall live. I promise to work hard to give you a good life, to make you laugh when you are sad, and to fill our home with as many mason jars of wildflowers as your heart desires. The congregation chuckled at the last part, but Penelope barely heard them. She was too focused on Quinton's face, on the sincerity shining in his eyes. I, Penelope Marie Jenkins, take you, Quinton Paul Pierce, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in good times and bad, in sickness and health, for as long as we both shall live. I promise to make our house a home, to stand by your side through whatever adventures life brings, and to arrange a life with you that is as beautiful as any bouquet of wildflowers. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quinton's kiss was tender and sweet, a promise of all the kisses yet to come. The church erupted in applause, and they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future held. The reception at the farm was a joyous affair, with tables laden with food, music from a fiddle player Quinton had hired, and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Penelope danced with her new husband, with her mother, with what felt like every man in Concord, but she always came back to Quinton's arms where she belonged. As the sun began to set, and the guests started to drift away, Quinton pulled Penelope aside. I have something for you, he said, leading her to the barn. Inside, he had set up a small workshop area, and on the bench sat a beautiful wooden box, intricately carved with images of wildflowers. "I made this for you," he said, opening the lid to reveal dozens of small compartments. "I thought you could use it to store seeds, dried flowers, whatever you like. I know it is not much, but I wanted you to have something I made with my own hands." Penelope ran her fingers over the carved flowers, recognizing each variety: asters, black-eyed Susans, Indian paintbrush, Queen Anne's lace. All the flowers she had been arranging that first day he saw her. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "When did you find time to make this?" "I have been working on it in the evenings after you went to bed. I wanted it to be a surprise." Penelope threw her arms around his neck, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I love it. I love you. I am the luckiest woman in the world." "I am the lucky one," Quinton murmured against her hair. "You took a chance on a wandering cowboy with nothing but a dream and a handful of savings. You saw something in me worth betting your future on. I saw a good man with a kind heart and a strong work ethic. I saw someone who looked at me like I was something precious. I saw the man I wanted to spend my life with." They stood there in the barn, holding each other as the last light of day faded, until Martha discreetly cleared her throat from the doorway. "I hate to interrupt, but folks are starting to leave, and you should probably say goodbye to your guests." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Quinton finalized the purchase of the land, and work began on the house. He hired a small crew of builders, but he did much of the work himself, determined that his home would be built with his own sweat and labor. Penelope helped when she could, though Quinton was constantly telling her not to work too hard, that she should rest, that he did not want her wearing herself out. "I am not made of glass," she would remind him, laughing. "I can handle a hammer and nails." "I know you can, but humor me. Let me take care of you." The house came together surprisingly quickly. It was a simple structure, 2 stories with 4 rooms downstairs and 2 bedrooms upstairs. The porch that Quinton had promised stretched across the entire front of the house, wide enough for chairs and Penelope's flower arrangements and lazy Sunday afternoons spent watching the world go by. They moved in on a crisp October day, when the leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold. Martha came with them, though she insisted on helping rather than being treated like a guest. Together, the 3 of them carried in furniture, hung curtains, and arranged the kitchen. Penelope's first act in her new home was to place a mason jar filled with autumn wildflowers on the kitchen table. Quinton came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Welcome home, Mrs. Pierce," he murmured. "Welcome home, Mr. Pierce," she echoed, leaning back into his embrace. That first winter in their new home was one of the happiest times of Penelope's life. The house was cozy and warm, heated by the large stone fireplace Quinton had built in the main room. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Quinton working on various projects while Penelope read aloud from books or newspapers. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing their dreams and fears and all the little details that made up a life. Quinton started his horse breeding operation that spring, using the last of his savings to buy 3 good mares and a fine stallion. He had a natural gift for working with horses, and word quickly spread about the quality of his stock. By summer, he had more customers than he could handle, and they were able to start saving money for the future. Penelope continued her wildflower arrangements, but now she had a purpose beyond simple decoration. She started supplying flowers to weddings and funerals in Concord and the surrounding towns, her artistic arrangements becoming sought after. The money she earned was modest, but it gave her a sense of pride and independence that she treasured. Martha had indeed moved onto their land. into a small but comfortable cottage that Quinton had built about 100 yards from the main house. She was close enough to visit daily, but far enough away to give the young couple their privacy. She helped with the horses and continued to grow her vegetables, selling the surplus at market. As the seasons turned and their first year of marriage drew to a close, Penelope began to suspect that their family might be growing. She waited to be sure before telling Quinton, wanting to be absolutely certain before raising his hopes. When the doctor confirmed her suspicions, she could barely contain her joy. She planned the announcement carefully, waiting for the perfect moment. It came on a mild evening in early spring, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. Quinton was whittling a piece of wood, working on what would eventually be a rocking horse for a customer's grandchild. "Quinton," Penelope said, her voice casual despite the butterflies in her stomach, "I was thinking we might need to add another room to the house soon." "Oh, why is that?" He did not look up from his whittling. "Well, we are going to need a nursery. For the baby." The knife and wood fell from Quinton's hands, clattering onto the porch floor. He turned to her, his eyes wide. "Baby, are you saying what I think you are saying?" Penelope nodded, unable to keep the smile from her face. "We are going to have a baby. Sometime in late October, the doctor thinks." Quinton let out a whoop that probably scared every bird within a mile radius, then swept Penelope into his arms, spinning her around just like he had the night he proposed. "We are going to have a baby. I am going to be a father. You hear that, world? I am going to be a father." "Put me down before you make me dizzy," Penelope laughed. But she was crying too, overwhelmed by the joy on her husband's face. When her feet were back on solid ground, Quinton knelt in front of her, placing his hands gently on her still flat belly. "Hello in there, little one. This is your papa. I just want you to know that you are already so loved. You have the best mama in the world, and I promise I am going to do everything I can to be a good papa to you." Penelope ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "You are going to be an amazing father." True to his word, Quinton started working on a nursery the very next day. He built a beautiful cradle from oak, carving it with the same wildflower designs he had put on Penelope's seed box. He made a small dresser for baby clothes, shelves for toys, and even a rocking chair for Penelope to nurse in. As Penelope's belly grew, Quinton became increasingly protective, fussing over her constantly. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest in the afternoons, and worried endlessly about every little twinge or discomfort she experienced. "I am not the first woman to have a baby," Penelope reminded him gently. "My mother did it, and her mother before her. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I know, but you are my woman and this is my baby, and I cannot help but worry." Martha, watching these interactions with amusement, finally took Quinton aside one day. "Son, I appreciate your concern for Penelope, but you need to settle down a bit. She is healthy and strong, and Dr. Miller says everything is progressing perfectly. If you keep hovering like this, you are going to drive her mad before the baby even arrives." Quinton had the grace to look sheepish. "I just want everything to be perfect. I want Penelope to be safe and the baby to be healthy, and I feel so helpless. There is nothing I can do except wait and worry." "You can trust," Martha said gently. "Trust Penelope, trust nature, trust that everything will work out the way it is supposed to. And in the meantime, focus on being present and supportive instead of anxious and overbearing." Quinton took the advice to heart, and though Penelope could see the worry in his eyes sometimes, he learned to channel it into more productive pursuits. He prepared everything they might need for the baby, stocked the pantry with enough supplies to last through the winter, and made sure the house was in perfect repair, before Penelope's due date approached. On a cool October evening, as the first frost touched the ground and the wildflowers finally gave up their summer glory, Penelope went into labor. Quinton immediately rode into town to fetch Dr. Miller and bring Martha from her cottage, then paced the downstairs like a caged animal while the women tended to Penelope upstairs. "This is the hardest thing I have ever done," he confessed to Martha when she came down briefly to get more hot water. "Hearing her in pain and not being able to do anything about it. How do men stand it?" "By remembering that what she is going through is bringing new life into the world," Martha said. "And by having faith that she is strong enough to handle it, because she is. Now stop your pacing before you wear a hole in the floor and come hold your wife's hand. She is asking for you." Quinton took the stairs 2 at a time and entered the bedroom to find Penelope propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat but her eyes bright. "There you are," she said, reaching for him. "I was wondering if you were going to hide downstairs all night." "I was not hiding, I was giving you privacy," Quinton protested, but he took her hand gratefully, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Well, I do not want privacy, I want you here with me." So Quinton stayed, holding Penelope's hand through each contraction, whispering words of encouragement and love, being the steady presence she needed. And when, just as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, their son finally made his entrance into the world with a lusty cry, Quinton wept openly. "A boy," Dr. Miller announced, placing the squirming, red-faced bundle in Penelope's arms. "A healthy baby boy with a good set of lungs on him." Penelope looked down at her son, counting his tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the perfect curve of his ears and the shock of dark hair on his head. "Hello, little one. We have been waiting for you." Quinton sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Penelope and one finger held captive by his son's surprisingly strong grip. "He is perfect, absolutely perfect, just like his mother." They named him Samuel Robert Pierce, Samuel after Quinton's father and Robert after Penelope's. From the moment he arrived, Samuel became the center of their world. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's hazel eyes and his mother's smile. Quinton proved to be every bit the devoted father Penelope had known he would be. He would spend hours just watching Samuel sleep, marveling at each tiny breath. He learned to change diapers and swaddle blankets, though his large, work-roughened hands seemed almost comically oversized compared to the baby's tiny body. At night, he would pace the floor with Samuel when he fussed, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice until the baby settled. Life fell into a new rhythm, one that revolved around feedings and nap times and the 1,000 small tasks that came with caring for an infant. Penelope had thought she understood love before, but what she felt for Samuel was something different, something fierce and protective and all-consuming. And watching Quinton with their son, seeing the gentleness and wonder in his face, made her fall in love with her husband all over again. As the winter snows came and went and spring returned to their little corner of Massachusetts, Samuel grew from a tiny infant into a roly-poly baby with a ready smile and an infectious laugh. He was fascinated by everything, his wide eyes following the horses in the pasture, the chickens in the yard, and especially the mason jars of wildflowers his mother placed throughout the house. "He has your eye for beauty," Quinton observed one day, watching as 6-month-old Samuel reached for a jar of spring flowers, his chubby fingers opening and closing with determination. "Or maybe he just wants to knock it over," Penelope said practically, but she could not hide her pleased smile. The horse breeding business continued to thrive, and Quinton hired a young man named Thomas to help with the workload. This freed up more time for Quinton to spend with his family, something he treasured above all else. They would take long walks around their property, Samuel riding on Quinton's shoulders, pointing out horses and birds and flowers. On Samuel's first birthday, they threw a party that brought together everyone who had become important in their lives. The house was filled with laughter and love, and as Penelope looked around at all the happy faces, she felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had been waiting for all those years, this feeling of completeness, of being exactly where she was meant to be with exactly the people she was meant to be with. That night, after the guests had gone and Samuel was asleep in his cradle, Penelope and Quinton sat on their porch in the rocking chairs he had made. It was a warm October evening, much like the one when Penelope had told him about the baby, and the air was thick with the scent of autumn. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Penelope asked. "When you rode up to the farm looking for a room to let," Quinton reached over and took her hand. "All the time. I think about how close I came to riding right past, how I almost stopped at the Johnson place instead. Makes you think about fate, does it not? How one small decision can change everything. I think about what you said to me, about arranging a life together. I had been arranging flowers in mason jars, creating temporary beauty, when what I really wanted was to create something lasting. And then you came along and offered me exactly that. I was so nervous that night," Quinton admitted. "I had this whole speech planned, but when it came down to it, all I could think about was you and your flowers. It just seemed to fit somehow, asking you to arrange a life with me the same way you arranged those wildflowers." Penelope smiled in the darkness. "It was perfect. You were perfect. You still are. I am far from perfect, but I try my best. For you and Samuel, I would do anything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. The stars were beginning to appear, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. "I have been thinking," Penelope said eventually, "about the future. About maybe adding to our family again." Quinton turned to her, hope lighting his features. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "Not yet. But maybe soon if we are blessed. I would like Samuel to have a brother or sister, someone to grow up with and share his life with." "I would like that too. As many children as you want to give me, I will welcome them all with open arms." And so their life continued, seasons turning into years, each one bringing new joys and challenges. 2 years after Samuel was born, they welcomed a daughter they named Rose Alina, her first name chosen because Penelope said she was as beautiful and delicate as the wild roses that grew by the creek, and Alina after Quinton's mother. Rose was different from Samuel, quieter and more serious, with her father's dark hair and her mother's gray eyes. She was particularly attached to Quinton, crying whenever he left her sight, refusing to settle until he returned. Quinton, who had not thought it possible to love anything as much as he loved Samuel and Penelope, found his heart expanding to make room for this new little person. 3 years later came another son, James Quinton, a mischievous boy with a talent for finding trouble and a smile that could charm his way out of almost anything. And 2 years after that, their family was completed with the arrival of twin girls, Emma and Grace, identical in appearance but opposite in temperament. Their house, which had once seemed so spacious, now rang with the sounds of children laughing, arguing, playing, and learning. Penelope's mason jars of wildflowers still appeared in every room, though now they had to be placed higher to avoid curious hands. The business thrived, allowing them to add onto the house, creating more bedrooms and a larger kitchen to accommodate their growing family. Martha lived to see all her grandchildren born, a source of endless joy in her later years. She passed peacefully in her sleep when the twins were 3, and though they mourned her loss, they took comfort in knowing she had lived to see the family she had helped create flourish and thrive. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. Samuel showed his father's gift with horses and spent every spare moment in the barn, learning everything Quinton could teach him. Rose discovered a love of books and learning, and Quinton made sure she had access to every book she wanted, even though some folks in town thought it was a waste to educate a girl so thoroughly. James was the adventurer, always exploring, always asking questions, always getting into scrapes that gave his mother gray hairs. The twins, Emma and Grace, were inseparable, developing their own language that only they understood, finishing each other's sentences, and knowing what the other was thinking without words. Through it all, Quinton and Penelope's love for each other only deepened. They had their disagreements, of course, as any couple does, but they always talked through them, always put their family first, always remembered the promises they had made to each other on that autumn day so many years ago. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Quinton surprised Penelope with a trip, just the two of them, leaving the children with a trusted friend for a long weekend. They traveled west, retracing some of the routes Quinton had taken in his younger days, and Penelope finally got to see some of the places he had described to her all those years ago. Standing on a bluff overlooking a vast desert landscape painted with wildflowers, Penelope understood what Quinton had tried to convey in his stories. The scale was breathtaking, the colors impossibly vivid, the sky so big it seemed to swallow everything. "Thank you for showing me this," she said, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. "For sharing this part of your past with me. Thank you for being patient with a wandering cowboy who took far too long to realize what he was looking for was a home, a family, and a woman who could see beauty in everything." "Do you ever regret it?" Penelope asked, settling down, giving up the freedom of the open road. Quinton turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. "Not for a single second. The open road was never freedom, it was running. What I have with you, what we have built together, that is real freedom. The freedom to be myself, to love and be loved, to put down roots and watch them grow. I would not trade that for all the adventure in the world." They returned home to find their children had planned a celebration, with handmade decorations and a cake that was slightly lopsided but made with love. The family gathered around the table, and Samuel, now a young man of 19, raised his glass in a toast. "To Ma and Pa, who showed us what real love looks like, who taught us that home is not just a place, but the people you share it with. Who built something beautiful from nothing but hard work, determination, and a whole lot of wildflowers in mason jars." Everyone laughed and clinked glasses, and Penelope felt tears slip down her cheeks. Happy tears, grateful tears, tears for all the blessings that had filled her life beyond anything she could have imagined that day, when a dusty cowboy had ridden up to her mother's farm looking for a room to let. As the years continued to pass, the children began to forge their own paths. Samuel married a sweet girl named Catherine from town and started his own horse ranch on a piece of land adjacent to his parents' property. Rose went off to college, one of the first women from Concord to do so, determined to become a teacher. James joined the railroad, satisfying his need for adventure while still returning home regularly. The twins stayed closer to home, Emma marrying a local shopkeeper and Grace opening a successful flower shop in town, carrying on her mother's tradition of creating beauty with wildflowers. She even used mason jars for many of her arrangements, a tribute to the grandmother she barely remembered, and the mother who had taught her to see the potential in simple things. Quinton and Penelope grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands becoming gnarled with age and work, but their love remaining as strong as ever. On warm evenings, they would still sit on their porch in the rocking chairs Quinton had made so many years ago, watching the sun set over the land they had built their life on. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Penelope asked one evening, her hand in Quinton's, their fingers intertwined as naturally as breathing. "When you asked me to arrange a life with you, I remember every word of that night. Why? Because I want you to know that it has been the greatest honor of my life, arranging this life with you. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, it has all been worth it because I got to share it with you." Quinton raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles just as he had done countless times over their decades together. "The honor has been all mine, my love. You took a lonely cowboy with nothing but dreams and gave him a home, a family, and a reason to wake up grateful every single day. I love you now just as much as I did the day I married you, maybe even more." On a crisp autumn morning, much like the one when they had moved into their house all those years ago, Quinton passed away peacefully in his sleep, his hand still holding Penelope's. He was 78 years old, and he had lived to see his children grown, his grandchildren thriving, and even the birth of his first great-grandchild. Penelope mourned him deeply, but she took comfort in the life they had built together, the legacy they would leave behind. She continued to live in their house, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still placing mason jars filled with wildflowers in every room, a tradition that would continue long after she was gone. When Penelope finally joined Quinton 5 years later, passing quietly in the same bed where they had shared so many nights, where their children had been born, where they had whispered secrets and dreams and promises, the whole town turned out for her funeral. Her children spoke of her kindness, her strength, her ability to find beauty in the simplest things. Her grandchildren remembered her flower arrangements and the stories she told. Her great-grandchildren, though young, would carry forward the memory of a woman who had lived fully and loved completely. They buried her next to Quinton, under a large oak tree on their property, the same tree where Quinton had proposed adding to their family, where their children had played, where generations had gathered. On her headstone, along with her name and dates, Samuel had inscribed a simple phrase that captured the essence of his mother's life. She arranged wildflowers in mason jars and created beauty wherever she went. The house remained in the family, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own touches while preserving the essential character that Quinton and Penelope had created. The porch still stretched across the front, though the rocking chairs had been replaced several times over the years. The barn still stood, though it housed tractors now instead of horses. And in every room, without fail, there were mason jars filled with wildflowers, a tradition that had started with a young woman's simple hobby and had become a family legacy. Samuel's great-great-granddaughter, a girl named Penelope after her ancestor, loved to hear the story of how her family began. How a cowboy had ridden up to a farm one summer day in 1876, looking for a room to let, and had found instead the love of his life. How he had watched a young woman arranging wildflowers in mason jars and had asked her to arrange a life with him instead. How from that simple beginning had grown a family tree with branches reaching far and wide, all of it rooted in love. Young Penelope would stand on that same porch, now reinforced and expanded but still the heart of the home, arranging her own wildflowers in mason jars, and she would think about her namesake. She would think about the courage it must have taken to say yes to an uncertain future with a man she barely knew. She would think about the hard work and dedication it took to build something lasting from nothing but love and determination. and she would smile, because she understood now what her great-great-grandmother had known all those years ago. That the best things in life are not the grand gestures or the expensive gifts, but the simple moments of connection and beauty. That love is not about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone perfect for you. That a life well lived is one filled with purpose, passion, and people you care about. The story of Quinton and Penelope Pierce became a family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations, each generation adding their own details, but keeping the essential truth intact. It was a story about taking chances, about building something beautiful from simple materials, about the power of love to transform ordinary lives into something extraordinary. And always, always, there were wildflowers in mason jars, a simple reminder that beauty can be found anywhere if you just take the time to look for it, arrange it with care, and share it with the people you love. Just as Penelope had done on that long-ago summer day when a dusty cowboy rode into her life and changed everything with a simple question: "Arrange a life with me?" The answer had been yes, and from that yes had come generations of love, laughter, hard work, and the kind of happiness that comes from building a life with your hands and your heart. It was a legacy worth preserving, a story worth telling, and a reminder that sometimes the best adventures do not involve traveling to distant places, but in staying put and creating something beautiful right where you are.